Hiya folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness, joining me for another episode of Strange Tales. Today I want to talk a little bit about the fondly remembered late 1970s television science fiction series Battlestar Galactica and connect the show to the proverbial rabbit hole that is the ET UFO paradigm. In order to do that, we need to look into the question of who actually created Battlestar Galactica. But before we do that, I just want to give you a little bit of background to the show. Battlestar Galactica was an ABC television series that aired for one season only between 1978 and 1979. It was originally entitled Adam's Ark, and it told the story of the 12 colonies of humanity. There was also a 13th lost tribe that eventually settled on the planet Earth and established the human race. The 12 colonies suffered an attack by the Cylons, robots created by an ancient reptilian race, and protected by the Battlestar Galactica starship, the survivors flee the colonies in search of Earth. And the opening credits of the show featured a narration that set the tone for the show. There are those who believe that life here began out there, far across the universe, with tribes of humans who may have been the forefathers of the Egyptians, the Toltecs, and the Mayans. They may have been the architects of the Great Pyramids, or the lost civilizations of Lemuria or Atlantis. Some believe there may yet be brothers of man who even now fight to survive somewhere beyond the heavens. Now, the credited creator of the show was Glenn A. Larson. He was also a producer on the show. In the documentary Remembering Battlestar Galactica, Larson recalled his perspectives of the origins of the show. I guess I was fascinated by a number of things growing up. I have Mormon origins, but was always fascinated by the theory of things, for example, Greek mythology and the pyramids. I loved von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. It's as if there were a greater source of knowledge, and whether it was Antarctica back down where it belonged as Atlantis or somewhere else, it's reasonable to believe that a planet billions of years old may have floated a civilization or two that was very advanced. I once thought to myself, what if heaven is the name of a planet? What if that's where our greater God is that built us, such as we are? Now, Larson often indicated that the ancient alien paradigm influenced the show's roots, and it also appears that the Mormon beliefs became a crucial part of that show. One telling example is the naming of the planet of the gods, birthplace of humanity in the show, called Kobol. Kobol is an analogous anagram of Kolob, which was a revered star planet described in Mormon scripture, which brought out this idea of religious propagation via the extraterrestrial subject in the show. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a moment. But it wasn't actually exclusive to Battlestar Galactica, and it may seem like I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I will connect all this back together in a moment. Literally a year or so after Battlestar Galactica aired, there was, in 1980, this notorious movie called Hangar 18 that was released. And the film incorporated specific aspects of the ET UFO cover-up. And despite being a relatively low-budget production, it actually received support from NASA and Rockwell International. Parts of the film were shot at Peyote Air Force Base, and the film was also one of a select few US films that was allowed to be shown in the former Soviet Union at the time. It's interesting as well that around about the same time there was some more degree of popularity of this idea of Hangar 18 that was brought about as a result of the 1918 television series hosted by Leonard Nimoy called In Search Of. And that featured an episode about UFO cover-ups and that sort of thing, and examined the charges that the US Air Force was hiding alien corpses and the remains of crashed spacecraft in Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. The film Hangar 18 was produced by Sun, spelt S-U-N-N, Classic Pictures. And I've always thought that was interesting because the sun idea, it ties in with sun worship and that sort of thing. But it was actually established in Utah as a Mormon-run company that employed many Mormon writers, producers and directors. And according to the researcher Robbie Graham in his 2013 article, Hangar 18, the CIA and the Mormon Church, he said, Sun Classic Pictures was established as an ideological tool for the purposes of influencing public opinion on subjects of great significance to the CIA, the military-industrial complex and the Knights of Malta, i.e. UFOs and Christianity. The film's depiction of human-looking extraterrestrials is particularly interesting, as it is the idea that these beings jump-started the human race. With that in mind, I find it curious that the themes of Battlestar Galactica seem to match with what Robbie Graham has discussed in relation to Hangar 18. So I started looking into the ideas behind Battlestar Galactica, the original Battlestar Galactica, more deeply. And one of the things that interested me was I revisited what was a very short-lived spin-off to Battlestar Galactica. It was like a soft reboot season 2 of Battlestar Galactica called Galactica 80. Most of the cast weren't in it. I think Lorne Greene was still in it. Dirk Benedict, the Starbuck, makes an appearance in the final episode of it. But it was technically a short-lived spin-off of Battlestar Galactica. And in the story, we actually find the Battlestar Galactica ship and the survivors of the colony actually reaching Earth. And several episodes involved the Galacticans playing cat and mouse with the US Air Force, using stealth technology to cloak their crafts. Those episodes included an on-screen caption just before the end credits, which read, "The United States Air Force stopped investigating UFOs in 1969. After 22 years, they found no evidence of extraterrestrial visits and no threat to national security." Now, for reasons still unknown to this day, ABC, that was the company that made Battlestar Galactica and the spin-off Galactica 80, they maintained, and this is according to the Battlestar Wiki website, that the show required a disclaimer to be shown on screen at the end of all episodes featuring the detachment. In that regard as well, I think that there's historical connections between ABC and Disney. And Disney have most certainly involved themselves in the perception management of the ET UFO paradigm over the years. There's many examples of that. They really have ingratiated themselves into the subject at one point or another. And the pilot episode of Galactica 80 depicted a rogue Galactican scientist who travels back in time. So in this example here, we have an extraterrestrial humanoid, for want of a better way of putting it, from the future, because the series is set in the 1980s, travelling back in time to World War II Germany and giving highly advanced scientific knowledge to the Nazis. And for those people who looked into my Stargate video recently, they'll see that that's not too far removed from some of the stories told by proponents of the Theosophical Society, theosophical beliefs, that sort of thing. This idea of extraterrestrial intervention at that point in history as well. So check out that video if you want to hear more on that matter. So earlier in the video, I talked about how you can connect all of this together via what we used to say is the true creator of Battlestar Galactica. Now, Glenn A. Larson is credited officially as the creator of Battlestar Galactica. But it had been long alleged that Larson had this penchant for sort of taking credit for other people's work, other writers' work. The legendary science fiction writer Harlan Ellison once famously called him Glenn A. Larson-y. And although it was not acknowledged by those who have officially documented the genesis and production of the show, a story has circulated for many years now amongst the Battlestar Galactica fan community online that really has divided their ranks. This idea that the true creator of Battlestar Galactica was none other than Leslie Stevens, who was the creator and executive producer, as well as writer and director of several episodes, of the legendary science fiction anthology series The Outer Limits from the early 1960s. In 2011, Andrew Fullen reposted a web article entitled "Leslie Stevens is the creator of Battlestar Galactica" by Susan J. Paxton. Enter Alan J. Levy. Levy is known as the director of Gun on Ice Planet Zero, which was an episode of Battlestar Galactica. But he also directed half of the premiere after Richard Kohler was let go by Larson. Levy was a good friend of the late Leslie Stevens. Recently, I interviewed Alan Levy. I had not planned to ask him any questions about the origins of Battlestar Galactica because he had not been involved early enough in the process to know about it. But out of the blue, with no prompting from me whatsoever, he said, "Well, Leslie Stevens wrote the original script. Leslie was one of my best friends. I do know that Leslie had told me at one time, way before he even got into the script, that he had this great idea for a script that was going to take to Glenn Larson and talk about it." So effectively, that was the premise for Battlestar Galactica. Now, I've often talked quite a bit about this idea of the intelligence community and the CIA and things like that, and the military-industrial complex involving themselves in belief systems, specifically New Age belief systems, religious belief systems, and things like the ET UFO paradigm, and the community that's interested in it, and how they've twisted it into all kinds of things to do with belief systems and things like that. This is where it gets interesting with Leslie Stevens, because Leslie Stevens was born in Washington, D.C. to a sizably Korean military family, and his academic years were spent at the United States Naval Academy, aka Annapolis. His father, Leslie Clark Stevens III, had a varied career. in the military complex. He was an MIT graduate, he was a 3-star admiral in the US Navy. Leslie Stevens Jr. himself, he was a little less interested in the military than his father, although that actually didn't stop Stevens Jr. from gaining some notable military credentials. He joined the US Air Force during World War II, became a captain at the age of 20. He worked in a substantial role for military intelligence as an officer based in Iceland. Post World War II, he studied at Yale Drama College, where he met future Outer Limits producer Joseph Stefano. And this is where it's interesting, because if you look at the show The Outer Limits, it was an incredibly popular show from the outset. Even though it only actually run for 2 seasons, it did have a troubled production. It seemed to constantly fall victim to these bizarre sabotage attempts on the part of ABC at producing the show at the time. Remember, here we have ABC that created The Outer Limits. ABC also created Battlestar Galactica. The episodes of The Outer Limits have some very interesting ideas going on in them. I mean, a lot of the subjects that they were touching on, very similar to things like national security surveillance, MK Ultra mind control type stuff, NASA, all kinds of things to do with like alien abduction, human experimentation, things like assassinations on political leaders and things like that. And of course you have all these ideas of secret societies and the occult. There's even an episode that alludes to the idea of the pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the $1 bill and all that kind of thing in it. So it's a fascinating show. It delves into all these kind of strange areas, which I suppose in many respects is actually to do with belief systems again. And you have these the intelligence establishment and the military and that kind of thing involving themselves in belief systems, as I've talked about many times in my research. Whilst on the subject of the cult, it's worth noting the production company for The Outer Limits was called Daystar Productions. And the Daystar name and logo appears to be another one of those curious corporate nods to sun worship and star worship. And we have the Daystar, which is the sun. The logo is made out of 5 stars with a negative space pentagon shape in the centre. And if you check out The Outer Limits Companion by David J. Schall, that includes an interview with Leslie Stevens where he discussed the origins of the Daystar motif. He said, "I am a great believer in the solar channel, the realization that the actual body of the sun itself is conscious, not sentient, but conscious." Now that usually makes people say, holy shit, what's he talking about? And why isn't he in a lunatic asylum? There's so much more to it that to cover it casually in a couple of sentences won't do it justice, but it will whet your appetite, right? Now, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole of Leslie Stevens' interest in these strange belief systems, things like that, his esoteric interests deepened greatly during the 1970s. He actually published the book EST, that's Stearman's Handbook, Charts of the Coming Decade of Conflict. And Wikipedia gives I mean, again, I'll mention this, I've always gone about Wikipedia, it's not a place that I recommend for going to, but it does give a very basic description of the book. It says, the EST in the title refers to what Stevens described as electronic social transformation. The book described a future society and the rise of what Stevens described as the EST people. The EST people were a new generation of post-literate humans who were to bring about transformation of society. The EST people were to be technically minded, eclectic and computer literate. They would possess qualities necessary for social transformation, integral to Earth's survival. Now, people can go really down the rabbit hole with the EST subject. There's connections to the Tavistock Institute, social engineering and things like that. Look into all the Lab 9 thing with Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. There's so many connections there that I'll be forever connecting them here for this in this video. Stevens was actually consulted on the subject of social transformation and social engineering on a number of occasions. He's actually referenced in the study Wiring Megalopolis 2 scenarios by Mike Hinshaw, and EST is actually closely associated with the New Age movement, so it's interesting that it's get brought up there. Stevens' connection with that movement is actually noted in the book Theism for Dummies as well. So all of this brings us nicely back to what Robbie Graham was saying about this idea of his assertion that certain depictions of the ancient ET UFO intervention, things like that, and I suppose the current aspects of the at that point in time the ET UFO subject as well, essentially being an ideological tool for the likes of the CIA and the military industrial complex. And does that hint something about the true nature of Battlestar Galactica? We have a show which, although it's officially credited as being created by Glenn A. Larson, there seems to be a lot of evidence that Leslie Stevens was involved with the creation of it. The ideas that he was pouring into things like The Outer Limits as well. You can see the follow through there of esoteric belief systems and military connections and things like that. We really do need to re-examine Battlestar Galactica in a different light. And it's interesting that when the show was rebooted in 2003 by Ronald D. Moore, a veteran of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, he further contributed to that extraterrestrial intervention paradigm in the show, because he posited that several thousands of years ago, ET humanoids and biological Cylons had settled on the Earth and interbred with the native human beings on the planet. So we have there a combination of transhumanism and the ancient ET intervention paradigm. That subject has become very, very prevalent now in contemporary science fiction. Battlestar Galactica might have been another one of those shows that's about social transformation, social engineering of that through belief systems being steered through the military, CIA, things like that. As always with Strange Tales, I will leave all of this for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe. I would truly, truly appreciate that. If you're interested in my alternative knowledge research, you can check out my books. They're available on Lulu Publishing and Amazon.com, the links for which are in the description for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you again very, very soon. Bye bye for now.